There is no more iconic villain in Star Wars than Darth Vader himself, with his black armor, imposing size, and monstrous mechanical breathing. It's clear why he was so feared throughout both the Rebellion and the Empire. His suit was a sophisticated yet torturous life support system designed to keep him alive after his near-fatal injuries on Mustafar. But it was a double-edged sword, because while it granted him enhanced strength and durability, it also subjected him to constant pain and limitations. Let's take a closer look at the suit and dive into the nitty-gritty details. This is Darth Vader's painful suit explained. Let's start with one of the most imposing elements of the suit, the helmet. One of the helmet's primary functions was to provide respiratory support for the Sith Lord. After his battle with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, Vader's lungs were irreversibly damaged. The intense heat from the lava had not only burned the outside of his body, but also the inside of his mouth, his esophagus, and ultimately both of his lungs. This damage alone would have been enough to kill him in short order had Vader not been rescued and treated in time. The triangular mouthpiece housed a complex breathing apparatus that regulated oxygen intake, as well as filtering out any contaminants such as dust or toxic gases. That means that the oxygen he breathed in was as pure as possible, something that was essential to keeping Vader alive. The sound of this function alone was a large part of Vader's presence, with his heavy mechanical breathing warning both friend and foe that the Dark Lord was near. The helmet was also fitted with an auditory sensor, which enhanced his hearing. When his body caught fire, Vader's ear canals became scarred and damaged, and he suffered from profound hearing loss. The auditory sensors allowed him to hear properly again, albeit in a filtered and artificial way. It could also be tuned to specific frequencies, allowing Vader to tap into certain transmissions. Similarly, his visual sensors were another tainted gateway to the world. While Vader's eyes remained relatively undamaged, the suit had a built-in visual interface, providing him with, amongst other things, night vision and infrared vision. That meant that when encased in his suit, Vader's complete experience of the outside world was entirely artificial. One other thing that the helmet contained was a neural interface that linked the helmet and the rest of the suit to his brain. This meant that a lot of the suit could be controlled mentally. This made things much easier for Vader on a day-to-day basis, and he didn't have to manually make any alterations. However, while the helmet was a technological marvel, there were many drawbacks. Firstly, it had an airtight seal, and while this was necessary to ensure that his helmet worked properly, it also meant that Vader couldn't take it off without being in a hyperbaric chamber, which allowed him to breathe more naturally. The neck brace was designed to dig into the skin in order to keep the helmet secure. However, it caused immense pain while wearing it, and then of course, the physical design of the helmet restricted Vader's peripheral vision, making both movement and combat difficult. Luckily, he could rely on the Force and his senses to fill in for the helmet's restrictions. Moving on to Vader's bodysuit, and you'll find that it is made up of multi-layered armor, which combines Durasteel and Plastoid. This combination was resistant to blaster fire and lightsaber strikes, though repeated hits in the same place would eventually have an effect. Still, not many of Vader's enemies got the chance to hit him repeatedly before meeting their own end. The inner lining of the suit contained a massive array of biomechanical sensors that linked back up to the helmet. It also contained healing agents that helped Vader manage his injuries, which, while essential, did absolutely nothing to actually heal the injuries, instead only ensuring they didn't get any worse. And on top of that, the suit also rubbed and chafed against the burned skin, causing constant irritation. That's not to mention several needles which were constantly injected into him. The gauntlets and gloves Vader wore were made of a similar material to the rest of the bodysuit, though the gloves were slightly thicker, meaning they had to be replaced less often due to battle and general wear and tear. They could absorb repeated blaster shots, giving the impression that Vader could quite literally catch the bolts without taking any damage. another imposing aspect of the Dark Lord. This was of course not the case, but it was certainly a rumor that Vader allowed to persist, giving those who opposed him even less of a reason to try to stand up to him and the Empire. Because Vader lost all 4 limbs, one arm to Count Dooku during the first Battle of Geonosis during the Clone Wars, and the rest to Kenobi during their duel on Mustafar, they all had to be replaced with cybernetics. These mechanical limbs, while fully functional and strong, were also heavy and cumbersome. And the legs especially were slightly larger than Anakin's natural ones, meaning that it took him a long time to get used to them. To help him with his movements, an electro-pneumatic system was installed which provided extra aid, allowing Vader to do things that many able-bodied humans took for granted. Still, the limbs were never properly fused to Vader's body, which caused terrible phantom limb pain that the Sith Lord struggled to ignore. They were somewhat upgraded and improved by Vader himself over the years. However, because they were all regularly removed so Vader could spend time in a Bacta tank, the mechanical limbs were never 100% interfaced with his organic body, and as such, his body never truly accepted them. They were also far heavier than necessary, meaning Vader was constantly burdened and physically weighed down. Of course, as with all systems, they were prone to malfunctions and bugs, and the suit would often have issues, causing spasms and jolts of intense pain. As mentioned, Vader, being technologically minded himself, did his best to customize many aspects of his bodysuit to ensure that it had no issues, and while he did improve life for himself, being trapped in there 24/7 was still a nightmare to have to endure, and his bodysuit still provided him with an incredible amount of painful feedback. In the center of the bodysuit sat Vader's life support system. This chest panel controlled 90% of the suit and its many functions. Not only was it a life support, but it also controlled power systems, as well as regulating respiratory functions. This essential piece of hardware could adjust oxygen flow, allowing Vader to breathe normally in all kinds of environments, and temperature, meaning he could operate on both extremely hot and extremely cold planets. It also allowed him to administer himself with regular, though extremely limited, painkillers. Similarly, the power core in his belt was a backup for if the main chest control panel had any issues. Unfortunately for Vader, the chest panel had probes that pressed deep into his torso. This alone caused chronic discomfort. The whole thing was also wired into his nervous system, meaning that if the suit was damaged, then Vader would feel physical pain. There was no manual override if the chest control panel was damaged, meaning he could suffocate if it stopped working. This is why it was so essential for Vader to protect the panel at all costs. Now, for all organic beings, it is important that they eat in order to take in nutrients and other things that are good for their body. It was no different for Vader, although his eating process was a lot more miserable than most. Yes, he was able to eat in the traditional oral fashion when in his hyperbaric chamber, though because of his scarred throat, it caused immense pain. Instead, more often than not, he took on nutrients via intravenous feeding, which delivered it directly into his body. And of course, what goes in has to come out. Vader's suit was capable of waste management, and he had processing systems like a catheter and recyclers built in. These would need to be regularly cleaned and maintained by medical droids in order to prevent Vader from contracting any infections, something which was especially likely considering how damaged and weak his body was due to the injuries sustained on Mustafar. As you can probably tell, being in the suit was miserable. Not only was it restrictive and claustrophobic, but wearing it was an intensely painful experience. But it was like this by design. When Darth Sidious rescued Vader and first put him in the suit, he wanted to ensure that Vader forever felt that constant pain. Not only was it a constant reminder of his massive failure, but it also helped him connect to the dark side. By being in pain, Vader could draw on it to keep him immersed in evil. The ongoing pain also had the added bonus of covering up any feelings of happiness and hope which might draw him closer to the light side of the Force. The technology was there to create a suit that was far more comfortable and easy to wear. However, Sidious chose to use relatively antiquated tech on Vader's suit, and while Vader himself could probably have upgraded it and made his life easier, he chose not to, preferring to stay in constant pain rather than be comfortable and let his mind drift back to Padme and the countless evil things he had done in his past. It's a scary yet sad thing that the former Jedi chose a life of physical agony over one of mental torture. Yet, it's what made him one of the most powerful and brutal Sith Lords in all of history, one whose mere presence struck fear into anyone who was around. Vader's suit extinguished hope and light not only for anyone who saw his hulking armor, but also for the one who wore it.